welcome to everyone. And this is the second episode of the Marie Curie Alumni Association Around the World webinar series, which reminds you took place every month on the second Friday. And it's a series of webinars which covers various topics. And I already invite you all to join also the next one, which will be about post-PhD careers as told by for researcher. And it will take place on the 11th of February 2022. And we will have a lot of speakers, and it will be organized by the Western chapter, the Western Balkans chapters. But as for today, we have already here James and Alexia, as we will be talking about public speaking for a scientist. And this is really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to this talk. To give you an overview, of course, Alexia is a chemical engineer by training, and she is the founder and CEO of Agent Majeuer, a science communication agency. And 13 years ago, she identified the need to create a structure which was dedicated to science communication. Now she's leading a team of communication professionals that are all PhD level scientists or engineers. And she helps research promote their work through strategic planning, event production, communication trainings, video, graphic design, and various other activities. And I welcome also James Bowers, who's completed his PhD in molecular biology and physiology in 2014 from the French Natural History Museum, and it was also funded by a Marie Curie scholarship. So for those who are part of the MCAA, he's also part of us, and he's like another followers, and he continues his studies doing an MSc in science media production from the Imperial College in London, funded by the Wellcome Trust. And he also has accumulated nearly 10 years of science communication experience, from writing to TV, documentary, web content, and events. And he has trained many people in public speaking and science writing. Currently, he is the chief editor at Polytechnique Insights, which is a social science media for Institut Polytechnique de Paris. And both of them together wrote Cellular Research, which is a great book and is based on a 3-step method that should prepare you to prepare engaging presentation, and it teaches you how to adapt to different type of public, so science conference, pitches, thesis, defense, and more. And of course, it will help you to discover examples on how to make a successful scientific presentation. And today, it's a pleasure to be discussing with them about public speaking as scientists. So without further ado, I would like to start right away with a very general question to Alexia and tell us what is communication and why is it important?
Hi, Ruben, and hello, everybody. So what is communication? Communication is the fact of transferring information from one side to another side. So it can be via videos or on social network, it can be written, oral communication, but what's common between all these type of communications is that communication has a purpose. There's an objective, a goal to reach, and that's very important in communication. And as for public speaking, obviously it's a speaker or several speakers talking to an audience, and the objective is to make your audience think something or do something. That's the purpose. And in order to do that, the idea is to send a message to your audience and hope that they will think and do what you hope them to do. So for example, think that you're reliable, or fund you or collaborate with you. That's the kind of objective that you may have. And in the research community, communication obviously is very important. There are many decisions that are based on either oral or written communication, scientific articles, conferences, meetings, funding reports. Well, many documents or communications are crucial for a researcher's career.
And in the book, at the beginning, while we explain what is communication and in general why it is important, you mentioned also a communication model. Can you explain what the communication model is and why is it important?
Okay, so many researchers have analyzed what is communication, have worked on communication and studying communication, and they tried to figure out how to visualize communication, how to make it visible, you know, And they built what we call a communication model, which is a scheme, in fact, of what communication is. So communication, as I said, there's, for example, the speaker, which is the sender. And then in front of him, there's an audience, which are the recipients, okay? The idea is to transfer a message from the sender to the recipient in order to get a response, in order for your audience to do or think what you want them to do. In fact, in the book, we have this scheme. So here it is. As you can see, probably the sender, the receiver, the message, and the response. But you can also see some filters. Here, you can see filters on the sender side and filters on the receiver side. So, because it's not so simple. On the sender side, there might be a difference between what you want to say and what you actually say. There is no difference between what you want to say and what you actually say. And on the recipient side, the audience, there are also many filters. First of them being they have to listen to you. That's the first thing. So if they're doing something else, if they're talking to each other, or if they cannot hear you because the sound is not good, obviously they won't listen to you. Okay, and then they have to understand, and then they have to act, if possible, the way they want them to act. So when we train people on communication and when we teach them how to communicate, we really work on those filters and how to make them disappear.
So we're already talking about filters and visuals, how important they are in communication. So James, how should I start preparing a presentation? What are the main things that I should keep in mind while preparing a presentation?
Yes, I think to follow on from what Alexia just said, was that Alexia is kind of explaining the general communication. So the next step, if we're talking specifically about public speaking, which is one type of communication, what you want to be doing is considering what kind of public speaking you're doing, right? There's lots of different situations where you as a scientist will find yourself in a public speaking setting. So that could be a conference, for example. Like if things are going very well, then you might get a keynote speaker position, which might be an hour-long slot. A conference, most likely what you're going to be doing is probably more like a short talk, which is more common, which is anything between 7 minutes to half an hour. But it might also be a journal club in your lab. There's lots of reasons why you'll be public speaking. And so the first thing you need to do is think about that context. So what is it? What is the situation? What is the event? And why is it that it's you that's talking? So, and why are you there, and how long do you have? What are the boundaries of your talk? So this is something you can do. You don't necessarily have to spend that much time doing it, but you can do it on the train on the way to work, whilst you're in the shower, but at least think about what the conditions of your talk are going to be. If it's a poster presentation, for example, you're going to be stood up and you're going to be talking to a very small crowd. If you're making a presentation in front of an amphitheater, then there may be 50 to 100 people in there. So all of those things are going to count into how you actually think about delivering your presentation all the way through. So it does help to just think about those kind of boundaries from the get-go.
And talking also about boundaries, as you were mentioning, Alexia, before, we have filters, and we have seen that from the communication model, when we try to communicate something, we are transferring a piece of information from one side to another. And so how do I make sure that the message is clear and it actually arrives from myself when I'm speaking to the audience I'm talking to?
Okay, so the message, I said, is what you want to communicate to your audience. Another way to define what a message is your audience should remember when your presentation is over, and it should be short and precise, specific to you and well, your talk, your research activity. So not everybody has the same message. So you should really think about this message and how to define it. And in order to define a message, there are 4 questions you should be asking yourself. So the first one, when you have a talk, okay, think about what are your own objectives. Okay, what do I want to get out of this talk? What do I want to happen when the talk is over? So that's the first thing. So write it down. Okay, these are my objectives. Then the second question you should ask yourself, I have an audience in front of me, okay? What are their expectations? So what do they want from this talk or from me? What do they expect? So write it down also. You have to put yourself in your audience's shoes in order to answer that question, but it's very important to know that because obviously they will look for something and you have to be able to answer to what they're looking for. The third question then you should ask yourself is, what arguments do I have for that specific audience? Okay, what can I say? What things should I focus on during my talk for that specific audience and in order to reach my goal? And write it down also, it's very important. And then the fourth question, so what is my message? You have to think about all you've been writing, and you have to be able to define something like short, about a sentence, that takes into account your objective, their expectations, your arguments, and find the best ones, the most important ones for the specific audience. So obviously, if you want to make your message clear, you have to ask yourself these several questions in order to define it. Because most of the time what we see is that scientists, but people, when they communicate, they forget to define their message. So it's very difficult for your audience to know what you expect from them if you just don't say it.
So far we have defined a message. So now we have a message. Hopefully it's clear, so we know what we're gonna say. We have an audience, so we are trying to communicate something to our audience, and we should be able, because we have done all this brainstorming, so how to communicate it. But how can I make sure that everyone in the audience is listening? Are there any technique that could help me out in reaching this objective or not, Alexia?
Okay. First of all, before you start talking, before the beginning of your talk, what I suggest is stay silent for a few seconds, okay? Look at your audience and see if they are quiet, if they are listening to you, if they are. So before even starting talking, look at them and see if they're listening, okay? And then when you start your introduction, start with a hook, with something that can catch their attention. So this hook can be a question that you're going to ask them. It can be an image, a picture, for example, that you're going to show them. It can be an anecdote that you're going to share with them, something that happened to you. What's important about this hook is that it serves your message. So everything in your presentation should be serving your message. And obviously your hook, what you're going to start with, should serve this message. So try to find something that serves your message, but that can surprise your audience or make them think, or make them react, because it's very important that they are active listeners and not only listening, but that what you say is making them think and asking themselves questions, and it's very important that they want to know more. So have that in mind when you start with your hook.
And then I think there is another critical point, especially for all person in the science world or doing a PhD, and as a scientist especially, most of the time we have to deal with a PowerPoint presentation. And for sure, all of us have to do one, and we had to do many of them, and we never know what is good or what is not good. So most of the time we can see presentation filled up with text or impossible to follow. So James, please, we need your support. We need you. Can you please tell us the secrets, or what are your suggestions to make a better communication and better presentation?
I feel like when we talk about how to improve PowerPoints in particular, it's kind of best to see it in action, because when we talk about it hypothetically, it's more difficult to actually see the benefits of some very simple changes that you can do to your PowerPoint slides. What I have in front of us here is a slide that I ripped it together. I didn't steal it from anybody. It's something that I made up myself, a fake presentation about trying to reduce emissions in the aviation sector. But it does look like, and I'm sure everybody will accept this, that it does look like a slide that we see very often in science talks. It's got some of all of the biggest kind of errors and mistakes that we tend to make. So I'm going to go through it step by step and kind of show some very simple changes that can be applied to any presentation. Without trying to point the finger at anybody here who makes these mistakes, because we all do it. So the first thing which is easy to do is there is this kind of myth in science presentations that we have to have things like logos and slide numbers and dates and things like that. We don't. It's a myth. So the first thing to do is get rid of everything that doesn't need to be there. You can show them maybe once or whatever at the end, maybe logos, but you don't have to have them straight up. The second thing is we often see slides like labeled with things like introduction, results, conclusion, stuff like that. We have that when we write a paper, when it's written down, and when we're segmenting everything out in that way. But in a PowerPoint, you don't need it. So it's just taking up space. Also, titles, when it's a paper, also need to have all the keywords in that you're using. Your slides and your presentation don't. So most of what you write on your slides can actually be removed. So I'm just going to take rid of everything in that yellow and have a very short, more succinct title. Also, if we go down to the bottom of the slide here, this fake slide person has tried to give a little bit of information about every single author. It's just a little bit too much and it's just too messy. So the easiest thing to do is just to kind of clean that up. And if people want to know more, then they can. And if you want to say it, you can say it whilst you're out loud. You don't need to have it written. The next thing is these bullet points. Obviously, bullet points is a great idea. It helps you to know where you are in your presentation, and it's a good reminder for both you and your audience. However, you don't need full sentences in your bullet points. Most things you can get rid of, and I have this debate quite a lot with people because people say, well, I can't shorten it. Well, you normally can. So you don't need things like results from, analysis of, or this computer models. That you don't need it. So we can shorten it down to kind of very short 2 to 3 word bullet points. And that gives us the opportunity to take up more space and to be clearer. Also things like visuals. There's 2 visuals here. There's a graph, which I'm going to completely remove because I think it needs to be on a different slide. And also an image, which I think we should make bigger and take up more space, and it makes our slide look more pretty. Now we've kind of cleaned everything up and the information's a bit more slick, let's say. There's kind of a final step that I would say, which is kind of cleaning up in terms of your layout. Okay, there's a couple of rules, which is very simple. If you go from this slide to, this one, it's a very subtle change, but things are aligned slightly more differently. So everything's kind of centered, the title has more space and the margins are equal around everything. Your audience will actually detect that kind of simplicity of kind of graphic design, which isn't that difficult to do. So we went from this to this, let's say, so in very summary. But actually, in reality, what I would do is I wouldn't have anything on the first slide. My first slide would actually be this one. So I would say here today, I'm here to talk to you about reducing emissions of the aviation industry. I will give you the title by saying it, and the image will speak for itself. It takes up lots of space. It will draw the attention of my audience, but won't necessarily, they don't need the title to be written down. That then means that the next slide, I can go through my bullet points one by one. I can reveal them, which means that I'm in control of what's going on in the presentation, where I am, and people aren't going ahead and reading bullet points before I've mentioned them. And then also finally, I'll end with a graph, if I have one, which will take up lots of space, have all the space it needs, nothing else on the slide to kind of bung it up, and I can take the time to kind of go through each of the elements on the graph that I want to explain. And it's just much more clearer and more user-friendly, let's say, in terms of presenting style.
Yeah, and I definitely saw a scary face from Alexia becoming an happy face, seeing how the slide evolved throughout this representation. And I think now we have another problem. So we are also used to talk at different audiences. So most of the scientists speaks to same level scientists in a sense, or conference. So we don't really have a popularization problems. And so what we haven't the problem to try to make our result easy to read or easy to understand, more understandable to wider audience. Especially I'm thinking to all the people in the Marie Curie Alumni Association who has to reach out to the wider public and share their result with common people. And with common people, we always don't mean stupid, but simply they don't have the knowledge of a certain topic that we know. So how should we engage with people? So what can we do to make our work more understandable from people who are not really at the same level in the sense of a scientific level for ourselves?
Yeah, so in terms of kind of science popularization and science communication, which are two kind of very inseparable things, there's kind of a couple of things that everybody can apply to what they're doing. I think what's fundamentally important to remember as scientists, so speaking to everybody in your audience, yourself, Ruben, and everyone else, is that generally when you guys will be talking about something, you'll be asked because you have expertise in that field, right? So the difference between someone like me and Alexia, who are more communicators and journalists or whatever, then what the first job that we have to do is we have to spend the time trying to understand the science before we can talk about it. You guys already have that knowledge, so you're starting with the first step. You have everything you need, and that is all the ingredients of the expertise needed to kind of to explain what you want to say, or you can find out that information very easily if you need it. Now, we talked about context earlier, so I mentioned context if you're talking in a conference or a poster session, for example. But if you're popularizing or doing science communication, then your situations will be slightly different. So for example, you might be doing a competition, which could be something like in France, we have a thesis, but internationally there is FameLab and things like that. You may be talking with the general public at a festival, like Fête de la Science if you're in France, but we have Pint of Science, which is international, and things like that. You may choose social media. You may be invited into a round table. You may want to work on a written piece with a journalist, like The Conversation, which is a very collaborative way of expressing yourself. You may be invited into the radio. I said La Méthode Scientifique, which again is French, but there's Naked Scientists in the UK. There's lots of situations where they will deal with the production and you will deal with what you're trying to say, and it's very verbal. And then also you may be very lucky enough to appear on larger media invitations, whether that be the press or actually, you know, on a news channel or something. Generally what will happen is if you are on these big media, then your interventions will be very short. Because there is a huge audience, but also they give a lot of, you know, they won't give you that much time. So you have to be very succinct in how you express yourself. On a daily basis, just as a side point, Polytechnique Insights, where I work, we're kind of more in the conversation type of media, actually. So we kind of have this collaborative interaction. But all of these types of media, the reason why I mentioned them is because each type of medium will have a type of audience or a type of situation in which you can express yourself. So if it's a competition, you might have 3 minutes, and also the people watching will be a jury or your peers or people who are interested in that kind of thing. If you're on a round table, people want to have a debate. You will be asked questions. You can prepare in advance. So all of these things will, if you know what you're doing and why you're doing, and speak to people who've previously, you know, taken part in those kind of things, it can be a very good idea to help you settle in. But again, as Alexia said, if you're popularizing, the important thing is your audience, right? So your audience is going to be different if you're popularizing than if you are doing a scientific presentation. Your audience is going to have a knowledge level which is going to be much lower than what you are expecting to come across if you're in a scientific field. So I do have this kind of 3-step rule that I came up with recently. So this is, it's based on Rick and Morty. So I'm not going to go too much into detail, but if you know Rick and Morty, then it's just Morty always ends up being the one in the terrible situations, and bad things always happen to him. So I used him as the example mainly. So the first rule I say is put yourself in their shoes. So try and imagine the people in your audience and why they're coming and whatever. If it's a general public, most of the time they want to be inspired by science. So they want to know what's exciting and what's fun about what you're doing, but also they want to know how it what it means to them, right? So if you work on astrophysics, they want to know what that is that that specific topic, what it means to them and in their lives and in the general world. The second is find your originality. So it's not quite why you're originalizing, what kind of music do you like and things. It's more about what's new about what you're trying to say based on what other people know, okay? So we've heard a lot over the past couple of years about COVID and vaccines and loads of information. So everybody knows what COVID is, right? But there may be something new, like the vaccine when it did come out, there was mRNA, which was completely new. And that was the new bit that people needed a bit more effort explaining. Okay, so what do you know and what's new that you can bring to the table? And finally, get rid of excess information. So that is the same as what I just did with the PowerPoint slides. And again, this is the piece of friction that comes back all the time. People always say, I can't shorten it down. I can't make it any more succinct. And I receive on a daily basis articles written by scientists who are 2,000 word long, and I have a 1,000 word limit. And they say they can't get rid of it, but they can always can. So if I come at it and I start editing, I can definitely remove excess information. And sometimes it's easier for other people to do that, because once we put in the effort to write something or create a slide or prepare something, it's very difficult then to not use it because we've done it. That chapter that we wrote, we don't want to put it in the bin because we've put too much effort into it. But as we see on this slide, there is always something that you can remove. So yeah, my quick little rules are: put yourself in their shoes, find your originality, and remove the excess. There you go. I will stop sharing now. So yeah.
That was really fun and interesting. And so we reach now a point where we basically looks like we are ready to go, so we can rock it, as we would say. So we have a clear message. We know what we want to say. We should know who we are talking to, so we should know the audience, and we should also know how we want to communicate. So we should be able to know already before if we have an audience to a scientist or if we want to talk to someone else, if it's an event on Zoom or live event. So we have now to face the one last problem that for many people is like possibly the most difficult one, which would be the public speaking. So what are the things that we should pay attention when doing public speaking, and how can we sort of avoid our legs to shake or with the stress that we have to public speaking? So Alexia, can you please give us some insight and some tips?
Okay, now Ruben, that's when we come to nonverbal communication. So the first steps that you have to go through when you want to communicate, obviously, is, well, define your message, define your plan, define your introduction, your conclusion, your PowerPoint slides, well, popularize your speech. Okay, but now it's also a physical exercise. And nonverbal communication is very important. Why is it important? Because there's a notion that is called congruence, and that says that important to align your verbal communication and your non-verbal communication. And for example, if you say, trust me to people, and that you look scary, your voice is trembling, and you're looking at your shoes, nobody will trust you. Okay, so non-verbal communication is about your body, okay, what you look like. So it's about, for example, your posture, your gesture that should be opened. It's about you watching the audience, so eye contact with the audience. That's very important. Also, what you should pay attention to is your voice, obviously, the speed of your speech, your tone of voice. Also, for women, sometimes or voice, be careful not to have a voice that is too loud or too low, but for men as well. What I believe is your energy is important, okay, your commitment. So how do I get better on nonverbal communication? By rehearsing. It's very important when you have a talk to rehearse in a loud voice. And especially when you have a contest like the one James talked about, for example, 3-minute theses or well, things that well, you have 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you have to convince, and it's your chance that you have to take. Really rehearse in a loud voice several times. It's very important because if you're confident and comfortable with your text, then your nonverbal communication will be smoother, it will be easier. Also, what I recommend is believe in what you're saying, okay? Be confident. Be confident because you're ready, your presentation is good, but also be confident because you trust yourself, okay? You believe in what you're saying. Sometimes what we see is that because their managers say they should change what they want to say, people are not comfortable because what they're presenting is something that they don't really agree with. In that case, there's a problem of congruence because as an audience, you can see that there's something wrong going on. So if you want to look confident, you have to be confident. So be confident in yourself and be confident in what you're saying and the way you're saying it. So that's why it's very important to prepare well. So that's what I recommend for managing your nonverbal communication. Also, obviously, there are exercises that you can make for your voice, for but as long as you rehearse and that you're confident about yourself and what you say, most of the job is done.
And of course, now it's been almost 2 years. We can say that we are also dealing with virtual presentation, and also already Susan popped up a question in the chat relative to Zoom, Microsoft Teams. So how should we deal when we present via screen? Of course, some of the things will remain the same. So about our preparation, our rehearsal, we should always, of course, take care of the same way. But are there any differences when we are presenting like on site, or if we have a virtual presentation? What are the things we should take care of? Apart from your internet connection, probably.
Yeah, obviously, this is one thing that you should take care of, but it's important that your audience can see you well and can hear you well. And in order for them to see you well, you have to make sure that you have light on your face. And not backlight, because then we won't see you neither. You have to make sure that you have, for example, a headphone that's working fine. People can hear you. What I recommend also is not to be too close from your screen, because it's nice, to have a certain distance so that people can see your gesture. It adds something, just not only your face, but also the top of your body, Personally, I also like to talk standing instead of sitting. So right now, I am standing and I'm not sitting. So it allows me to have more movement. I can move easily. So I think it's more lively for me, but for the audience as well. So the other things I would recommend also, pay attention to your camera. So your camera, if it's I try to put books under my computer so that the camera is in front of me and it's not down, so people can see can see me like I'm looking at them just right in front of them. So it's better for eye contact.
And I think one last point also when presenting something to the public or also to your peer group is anxiety. So this is a problem that, of course, the stress and everyone deals in a different way. But James, do you have some tips or some tricks that you have used throughout your career or that you suggested to your client in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something very, very real about anxiety and stress and the worry of speaking in front of a room full of people, and that it doesn't necessarily become more or less stressful if it's 10 or 100 people. That's very real and there. And I think the important thing is to accept that it is there and that everybody feels it, and also people may be able to see it. So we have this fear that, you know, Alexia was talking about congruence, and there is this fear sometimes that you don't want to look nervous. But actually, when we see nerves in people and they are real nerves, then we also, it's very human. We associate with that, and we actually, most audiences want somebody who's struggling to do well and will be on their side. And so actually it can be a very supporting thing. So there's, first thing is, it doesn't matter if your nerves are showing, so anxiety is okay. But there are a couple of things that you can do to kind of make that easier and easier to get through. And some of the first things you can do are when are before you actually do the presentation. So most of the time when you're presenting in whether it be in, I don't know, a meeting room or an amphitheater or a conference hall, you will be in that room before you actually present, right? So whether it's the morning when everybody's coming in to sit down, or whether it's the break or the lunch break or whatever, coffee break, one of those points you can go and just stand on the stage at some point and just go and be there and be in that environment and familiarize yourself with that space you're going to be in. It only has to be a couple of minutes, but at least it's not going to be the first time you see it when you go and talk. The second thing is also, whilst you're there, check that all the material works. So your PowerPoint slides, do they work? Does your USB key fit in the computer? Does the microphone work? Do you know how to do it? Very simple things like that. But it's worth it. You know, it will remove some stress if you've done that beforehand, and also introduce yourself to the organizers or to the chair. So sometimes, you know, if they're in a hurry, they might not have a chance to see you, and so they might call out your name and they don't know who you are in the room. And it's just go and say, hi, my name's James, I'm presenting at 10 o'clock, just so you know who I am. That's fine. You don't really have to say anything else, but at least it's done. You've kind of made that connection, and you've got a bit of, you know, a support, and people know who you are. And then the second group of things that you can do are also very simple things, and they're literally when it's time to go up, when it's your time and you're about to be called up to go and stand on the stage. So the first thing is breathe. We often forget to breathe when we're stressed out, and it's why we kind of get a lightheaded, because we're lacking oxygen. So before you know, sometimes even the anticipation, knowing your name's going to be called next, can be also part of the stress. So just breathe. You know they're going to call your name, and you know you're going to have to go up, and just, you know, try and focus on that for a little bit. And then also, when you get up there and you stand in front of people for the first time, before you speak, look at your audience. Try and just look at people in the room, so that it's not 2 minutes in when you all of a sudden realize that you're in front of 100 people and it's super intimidating. You know, you need to get that through at the beginning before you start talking, and it will just make things a little bit easier. Because doing that also, you'll find some nice people in your audience who'll be smiling back at you, and you'll know who in the room to look at that will kind of make a little bit more comfortable. And then the final thing is to focus on the first few minutes. So if you, like me, you have a tendency to talk very fast, then it helps to focus on your speed. Try and, for the first 2 minutes, just focus on trying to talk a bit more slowly. Or if you rock from one foot to another, if you have that tendency, try and, you know, be solid and remain on both feet just for the first few minutes, because once it's going and the ball is rolling and those first few minutes are over, then you'll set the tone then, and everything will be fine. It really is just the beginning and how you deal with it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think we cover a lot of points, and it was nice also to read your book. And I want to point out that also at the beginning of your book, you state that every scientist can become a great speaker, and it is simply a matter of hard work and technique. And I think I do really agree with that. And we have seen from this answer that we have had so far that it's really a matter of preparation and getting to know your audience and how to present yourself and what is your message. So I think that preparations is the key, and I don't want really to take any more time. So now I will just open the question from all of you. And I already have a question in the chat that from Pablo. And the question is, what about Q&A for your talk? Is it better at the end or during the presentation? And what is better to increase the interaction within the public? So I don't know if Alexia wants to go first, and then if James has something to add, please.
Yeah, well, what I would say, it depends, because it depends, first of all, on how many person you're talking to. I mean, if it's a small meeting and you have 6 people in front of you, it's quite easy to stop and answer questions. But if you have 100 people, I'd rather have questions at the end. So I wouldn't answer questions during the talk. What else can I say? Yeah, well, but it's good to have interactions, but you have to make sure not to be interrupted too much in order to keep focused on your message. And so, well, it's a question of balance, I would say.
James, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does depend on a case-by-case basis, but I think that there is something to be said about question and answer sessions at the end, or at least at dedicated moments. So, you know, if it is a long talk, why not stop halfway through and ask if anybody has any questions? That is useful. But if you, the whole point of questions is that it takes you onto a whole different area that you haven't necessarily gone in your presentation. So it's a very good thing to have, obviously. But in order to kind of keep on track with your presentation, then the best thing to do is, you know, for you to have your plan and stick to it. And questions may bring you out of that and overcomplicate things. So I would, you know, I would probably say as well, yeah, in general, it's best to have a set moment for question and answers.
Yeah, and you can state it. You can say, okay, well, you can see if one person, if you are in a meeting, one person asks you one question and it's not too long to answer, you can answer. But if you realize the question is, well, you're going to answer afterwards, or it's too far from what you want to say, just ask your audience to wait until the end to ask the question.
And then we have a comment from Atanasia, and I hope to pronounce all the names properly. I'm sorry if I messed up. And I think as a scientist, it is okay to not be overly confident about your work, your results, and that's understandable. In my opinion, there are no perfect results, but you can always be confident that you are the one that understands your own work better than anyone else. So you can talk about it better than anyone else. So do you agree? Do you have some other things to add to this sentence?
Sure. Yes, you're right. But, well, you cannot be, it is hard to be 100% confident, but still, I mean, there are things that you know are right. So you can be confident on those things. You know, you're not talking about something that you know nothing about. You've had results, positive results. I mean, there are things that you can be confident about. So it's not about lying or trying to transform reality. You know, it's not about that. But sometimes scientists, you know, hesitate. They don't want to be too affirmative. They don't want to, you know. But the problem is that if you don't look confident, and if you are not confident in some of the things that you propose, I mean, your audience might not trust you. So try to look confident and try to be confident on some of the things that you're presenting.
I think that there's something else to be said as well, that a lot of situations where you're doing a science presentation is just for that, right? So that you can express your findings, but then also you're showing it a lot of the time to other people so that it can be discussed. So if you're showing results to a bunch of other experts, then the idea is that those people are going to have their opinion as well on that work and what it is and why you're doing it and how to improve it or how else to analyze it, or, you know, that's what science is about. And so everybody, you know, there's difference between confidence. There's a difference between presenting your results confidently and being overconfident about your conclusions from those results, right? So those are two different things. You've done the work, you know what you're trying to explain, so you can confidently explain what you're trying to say and get your point across. That doesn't mean that the only way of interpreting the results is how you interpret them. That's something else that completely, for me, goes another field, and that's where the whole point of presenting your work is that people can understand it the best possible, so that they can also you know, participate in the discussion with you about it. So yeah.
Thank you. And then we have another question from Susan, and it is about Slido. So what about live audience survey like Slido? Is it a good idea? Which do you recommend? Do you have some experience? So James, do you want to start this time?
I actually don't have, with Slido specifically, no, but surveys, yes. And what I would say is that I'm personally, I don't always think that they're a great tool. I think they're a good tool when they're used correctly for the right reasons. So if you have a dedicated question or two that you want to ask during a presentation and get your audience to answer, so you can help have an interaction with your audience to kind of bounce off of ideas. There is one drawback with surveys and things whilst you're doing a presentation, is that people have to go on their phone or whatever to actually sign on and click on what they want to be doing. So if you do it, try and get people to sign up before or your presentation, so they've already got it on their phone, and then give them a dedicated moment to reply to the survey, because otherwise I've seen it a few times where everyone in the audience is just on their phone the whole, trying to work out the survey and not really listening as much. So for me, I'm kind of a bit divided about those kind of tools.
Alexia.
I would say that, for example, for us, that we train a lot of people during half a day, full days. So it's important for us to have moments when we do something else, when we interact with our audience, when we do trainings in Visio like that. So I do recommend to use that kind of tools. But for a talk, it depends, because it's going to take some time and people are going to be distracted. So, I mean, it depends. If you have a 15-minute talk, it's going to be very difficult to handle a survey as well, So I would recommend something like that for a longer talk or for training.
Okay, yeah, that is usable. And then we move to Francesco, who, first of all, thank you for all the insight that you have done so far. And he is wondering if you should rehearse also the gestures and coordinate them with some keywords of your talk. So do you think this would be an effective technique to align verbal and non-verbal communication? So Alexia.
Yeah, well, of course, we recommend that. We recommend to do that, but not all your speech. I mean, some specific moments, it's important. For example, gesture when you have several things to show, okay? When you have a list, it's good, for example, to show, okay, 1, 2, 3, and so that people can follow, for example. Or sometimes when you have an important word, you can do a specific gesture, to show that it's important. Sometimes silence also is very important. If you have an important word that you want to say, you can keep silent. And after, for example, and it will become important,
Anything to add, James?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. The first is that gestures, some come naturally and some can also kind of be parasitic in a way. So we all kind of have these things where we might, that you might want to control and stop from doing them because they're distracting. Whereas you also kind of need to find that balance of allowing your body to be free enough to kind of go with what you're saying, and so that it comes out naturally. Because if you talk with your hands, then good, talk with them, use them. But you also don't want them to be kind of distracting and doing the opposite of what you're trying to say. There is a technique that I like to use sometimes. It only works in various certain circumstances, but I think we wrote it as placing objects in the air. So, for example, if you want to demonstrate a link between a couple of things, you can say like, well, this is here, and then you move your hand away, but in our mentally, I'm still remember that there's an object there. So we can say this is here and this is here, and there's a line between the two things. All I did was gestures, but I actually just drew a diagram mentally for you with my hands. And sometimes that works, and it can be quite useful to stop you from kind of contorting your hands trying to show, I don't know, a complex molecule or something. But that only works in certain circumstances. Yeah.
And then we have a question from Jeanne. And she said that I was once in a conference where the speaker actually delivered a very good presentation. However, he moved too often and somehow it distracted. Do you think it is a good idea to move around the stage or room, either to hide the nervous or be more interactive with the audience? Thank you for your answer. Alexia, we want to start?
Yeah, well, people have an idea that it's important to move and you have to move. But to me, you don't have to move all the time. It's good to stand still but to have body gesture. It's good sometimes to move from one point to the other if you have to, or as we said, if you want to emphasize something. But it's not good, to move like that. That's something very uncomfortable for your audience, for example. So, so to me, it's more something like people have in mind that you have to move, okay? But sometimes it's not that important. I mean, what important is that, well, there's energy, there's commitments, there's something different, but moving for moving, I don't like it.
James.
Yeah, I actually, one of the last training courses I think that I was in, that I had to ask somebody, and I mean, it often happens actually, there's in a training course where it has to be done, where there's this kind of like movement, constant movement, as in like back and forth. And I feel like there's this kind of like mental image that we have of this confident person that's moving around the stage and taking up all the space, and actually it's not quite true. Most of the time it's anxious energy actually that is not only distracting your audience, it's actually distracting you, because you're thinking about moving when actually you should be thinking about what you're trying to say. So it helps, and I do this, just ask people to kind of focus on keeping their feet in the same place, and that doesn't mean you have to the whole time. But if you just get used to kind of standing still, that energy will come out in a different way. And it can come out in your arms, in your facial expression, and the way that you talk. And so you're kind of redirecting that nervous or kind of anxious energy out of your kind of moving your feet and into something else.
But sometimes it's nice to have in mind that you are going to move. And for example, you're going to make a demonstration or show a prop or something, but you put it in another place so that you have to move to go there and to get it or to do your demonstration, and then you come back. And it's good because, okay, it's a distraction. It's good not to be always in the same place, but if you do it, it has to have a specific purpose, So, but sometimes it's a good idea to think in advance. Okay, when I want to show this object, I want to do this demonstration. Maybe I should put it on the other side of the stage, in order to move, and then for people to, to see that something is happening on stage.
And now we have a really tricky question from Susanna, and it says, what to do if some part of your topic touches ethical and/or political beliefs of your audience? To what extent you keep neutral, as a scientist have opinions too, as you mentioned, how to avoid that the comments derail from the topic too much? James, do you want to start on this?
I think that it depends on what your talk is, right? So your talk may bring up questions and debates that don't, that are much more societal and scientific. And so your job as scientist is to explain what you know and what you do. But also, if you work on a topic that touches political or ethical issues, then you probably already know that, right? So this isn't going to be a surprise when you go into the talk, and there may be people in the audience who don't agree with certain aspects or are a bit militant about things. So you can also be aware that those people are there and take them into account. Okay, so the best way to get an audience on board is to express to them that you understand their point of view. So at some point in your presentation, can express that you understand the different points of view regarding the work that you're doing in a subtle way. Perhaps it doesn't matter, but at least the people in the audience know that you understand them, and that what you're explaining or what you're talking about, you are capable of taking their opinion into account. I mean, it's very hypothetical because there isn't a specific example here, but something that I think is something like vaccines, can get quite heated sometimes, and other topics like that. And I think that, if you have a wall up straight away too, then it's going to be very difficult to get your audience on board.
Alexia.
Yeah, in fact, the thing is that in the book, we have some part of the book dedicated to how to talk about controversial topics. Okay, vaccines being one, obviously, and specifically, we're talking how to make a plan of your presentation when you're talking about a controversial topic. And what we say is that obviously you shouldn't start your presentation by saying, yeah, vaccines are great and I'm going to talk about them, when you know that your audience in front of you is well, either doubting or well, just disbelieving that vaccines are good, or thinking even that vaccines are dangerous, obviously. So don't start by saying something that is going to make them disconnect with you because you know that they are against vaccines. So what we recommend is to start by saying, okay, I know that some informations are going on right now about vaccines, saying this and that. And so what I understand that some people may think that for those specific reasons, but now let me explain you why I think this is different. Well, you know, it's something like that. So be aware that they don't believe the same things that you do. Okay, so don't offend them, or don't say that what they think is stupid, or, you know, take into account the fact that they think, for example, vaccines are not good because of some reasons. So talk about that, you know, why they think that and why you think something else.
Thank you very much. And I think we have 4 minutes left. So if someone has still one question, you can feel free to drop it in the chat or simply turn on your video or your audio and we can make it happen. Yes, we will send the details of over the book. And I don't know if James or Alexia have a link ready to go to post it in the chat, or anyway, you will find the details on the Marie Curie. We will do a blog about it and you will definitely have the detail of the book. The title, if you want to see it at the moment, is Cellular Research, and it is edited by Springer. So you can find it, I think, also on Amazon or springer.com, and you will find it. And so to conclude, thank you very much for the link, Silvana. And so I will pop in with a last final question that is also relative to PowerPoint. And the question would be, we also see many text, a lot of text or not many images, but another problem I've noticed is transition, animation, special effects. So to conclude this webinar, what's your take on animation, fancy transition, word of art or stuff like that? Want to start, or Alexia, as you prefer?
Well, I mean, I would say stay soft. Only do things that make your purpose, your content clear. You know. So I like it to use transitions. I like it to show things. You know, one idea after the other, so that your audience follows your argumentation, and they don't read your slides and don't listen to you. So it's how you make their attention focus on what you're talking about. So that's very important. So really, animations can help you. But to me, this is the purpose of the animation. They should be helping you, showing what's important to look at right now. And for the rest, I think we should avoid animation.
Yeah, I think I agree entirely. I think simplicity is always the best option. You don't want to be distracted from you being able to get your message across, and things that are a bit too much generally just distract. So yeah, simplicity is key.
Yeah, but sometimes it's good to make your audience laugh, for example, you know, with the music or with something, you know, but so it's always a question of balance. I mean,
there is a good example there is that animation you can do on PowerPoint that kind of bounces the thing off the screen, and used at the right time, just once, you know, when that can really be a good tool, but you don't want to have every single bullet point coming in on the jumpy kind of like spiral. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an hour, so I want to thank you both of you for being here for this, actually the second webinar of the series, and for the second time that you presented here for the Marie Curie Alumni Association. And I want to thank all of the participants who were there and asked a lot of questions. I hope that this webinar was very, very insightful for you and you learned a lot about public speaking and communication. Again, you can find the book pretty much everywhere. It's Cellular Research, and James and Alexia explain basically everything even more in detail about what was discussed today. And I read it by myself, and of course it's not sponsored. I definitely read the book and I found it really, really interesting, and it helped me a lot throughout my career. So it's definitely suggested reading that you would take literally one day to read through all of you. And so James and Alexia, again, thank you very much. And if you want to say something as a last message, feel free, Alexia.
Well, communication, not only it is important for you as a researcher and for your career, but it's a real pleasure to give great communications and to feel people, you know, that are enthusiastic about what you do. So it does take time, does take effort, but it's worth the time you take.
James? I have 1% battery on my computer, so I just want to say thank you and thank you for listening. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much again to both of you, and to all the participants. Keep in touch with the Marie Curie and join the next webinar on the 11th of February. And thank you again, and wishing you a nice evening, a nice 2022. And I will be in touch with a blog post. The webinar recording will be posted on YouTube, so we'll be in touch again.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye to all of you.